Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. State Department in the United States says it cannot confirm authenticity of Kremlin drone strike claim, nor Ukraine's attempt to kill President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky denies attacking the Kremlin as Nordic countries pledge continued support for his country. Former U.S. President Donald Trump boasts he'll end the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours if he were in the saddle. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he cannot validate Russia's accusation that Ukraine tried to assassinate a Russian President Vladimir Putin in a drone attack, but said he would take anything coming from the Kremlin with, quote, a very large shaker of salt. Asked if the United States would criticize Ukraine if it decided on its own to strike back in Russian territory, Mr. Blinken said those were decisions for Ukraine to make about how to defend itself.
Well, first, I've seen the reports. I can't in any way validate them. We simply don't know. Second, I would take anything coming out of the Kremlin with a very large shaker of salt. So let's see. We'll see what the facts are. And it's really hard to comment or speculate on this without really knowing what the facts are. More generally, as I've said and as we've said, when it comes to Ukraine, which is under daily assault, and not just its incredibly courageous military forces, but its citizens, its men, women, and children being assaulted on a daily basis by this Russian aggression, being bombed out of their homes, their apartments, and their streets, children killed, families torn apart. Well, we leave it to Ukraine to decide how it's going to defend itself and how it's going to try to get back the territory that's been seized from it illegally by Russia over the past 14 months and going back to 2014, back to then.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Meanwhile, the White House says it is aware of reports that Russia accused Ukraine of attacking the Kremlin with drones to try to kill President Vladimir Putin, but could not authenticate or confirm the allegations. Spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters that they are aware of the reports, but are unable to confirm the authenticity of them at this time.
So we are aware of the reports, but are unable to confirm the authenticity of them at this time, and so I don't want to get into speculation from here about what happened, but we are indeed aware of the reports. Since the beginning of this conflict, the United States is certainly not encouraging, enabling Ukraine to strike beyond its borders. We've been very clear from here about that. But again, I don't want to get into speculation from here about the authenticity of this report. So I'm just not going to speculate from here. I want to be super mindful here. Again, we've heard the reports. Not something we want to that we are able to confirm. Want to be incredibly mindful here. It is really too early to tell, as you asked me about the false flag, essentially. But obviously, Russia has a history of doing things like this. But again, I don't want to speculate. I don't want to get into hypotheticals from here. But we are just unable to confirm at this time.
And the U.S. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel says that his country is aware of the reports, but that they're also closely monitoring the situation.
We are aware of these reports, but unable to confirm the authenticity of this. But also, as the Secretary said, I would take anything coming from the Kremlin and the Russian Federation with a shaker of salt. But throughout this, it's important to remember a couple things, Nick. First, Russia invaded Ukraine. It did so unprovoked. They started this war, and they could end it today if they pulled their troops out. Number two, Russia continues to fire missiles and drones at Ukraine every week. And they have done so and targeted scores of Ukrainians, including children, and they have been targeted places like hospitals, apartment buildings, and we have been very clear that we're going to continue to support Ukraine as it defends itself from Russia's invasion.
And as we've been reporting, Russia accused Ukraine of a failed attempt to assassinate President Vladimir Putin in a nighttime drone attack on the Kremlin in Moscow and vowed to retaliate. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kiev had nothing to do with the incident, purportedly caught on video and published on Russian social media channels. However, analysts say that if indeed the drones were sent to Moscow by Ukraine, the intent was likely a messaging operation meant to show it could penetrate defenses in the Russian capital rather than an attempt on the president's life.
It's interesting that the Ukrainians have probably been trying to do this for many, many months at this point, to strike out at a critical strategic target, not from a military standpoint. This isn't going to win the war, but from a messaging standpoint that Russia can't just go on attacking Ukrainian cities and not suffer some sort of blowback or some sort of consequence. This notion of the Kremlin as a fortress, I mean, that's what it is. It's a fortress. Now being subject to air attacks is something that's going to be difficult for the Russian establishment to kind of explain. So now there's a conversation around whether this was staged to as a pretext to then kind of lash out at Ukraine, demonstrate that Ukraine's kind of a terrorist state. I think that's a bit far-fetched. You're undermining the kind of the criticality of demonstrating Russia as a, secure, powerful state for some unclear message, some unclear pretext to then lash out at the Ukrainians. When frankly, the Russians don't have much more they can do. I mean, it's not like now they're going to escalate to attacking Ukrainian cities or peaceful populations. They're already doing that. The Russians will try to leverage this narrative around an assassination on Putin to then up their game with regards to pretext to up their game to go after Zelensky himself, but they've been trying to do that anyway since the beginning of the war. There's plenty of reporting that indicates Russian kind of kill teams were out there trying to hunt down both Zelensky and his family. So it's mainly, I think, a rally around the flag effect that the Russians are going for.
It is technically possible. Ukraine has several types of drones that can fit the profile. For example, its newly developed UJ-22 drone can actually fly the distance. It's a commercial drone that they acquired from China. It's Mugin 5 cargo drone, which can be basically purchased online and could be refitted into a military drone. That drone can fly several hundred kilometers, and it was used in previous attacks. If it was, in fact, a Ukrainian drone that was able to penetrate all the way into the Kremlin, speaks volumes about the strengths and the gaps and the problems within the air defense and electronic warfare defenses if, in fact, they fail to stop this drone. It could be a symbolic strike into the heart of Moscow to demonstrate that basically no part of European Russia is safe from a Ukrainian attack, and obviously attack on Kremlin has a lot of symbolism considering that on May 9th, Russia is supposed to hold a massive Victory Day parade there. It could have been an operation by non-military actors, someone basically anti-Russian, but not necessarily with the blessing of the Ukrainian government. And of course, attacks of this kind, if they are in fact carried by Ukrainian military, are meant to keep the Russian military off balance by forcing them to reallocate and rededicate air defense resources to specific places like Moscow, probably at the expense of other regions, including, for example, Russian military inside Ukraine proper that has to have enough air defense and electronic warfare protection.
American analysts weighing in there on the Russian claim of an attempt to assassinate President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reiterated the case for his country to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, the Western military alliance of which Finland last month became the 31st member in direct response to Russia's invasion. While in Helsinki, Mr. Zelensky also attended a regional summit that included the prime ministers of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, all of which said they supported Ukraine's ultimate goal of becoming a member of the EU and NATO. The Ukrainian president's visit to Finland, one of only a few journeys he has made abroad since the Russian invasion, was announced only after his arrival amidst tight security in the Finnish capital.
You know, I can repeat this message, and I think it will, at least will be understandable for everybody. We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, you know, enough weapon for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
I would like to say it is a moving historic day that you are here with us. We have all been visiting you in Ukraine, and I take it as a sign of hope and future that you are now on Nordic soil.
Solely for bringing Nordics on. The decision to grant Ukraine candidate status last year was an historic one. And we continue to support Ukraine's merit-based accession process and assist in the reform efforts that will pave the way for Ukraine to start EU accession talks.
We talked a lot about the upcoming summit of the Council of Europe, because there Ukraine is going to be the main focus, not least the issues of accountability and how we can restore justice after this illegal invasion.
Well, thank you for that
question. For me, it's also interesting.
Yes. And we have tried this several times before, you and I. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
First of all, when we talk about the fighters, that's a question we have been discussing for some time now, and it is still an issue that we talk about among allies. It's a difficult task, it's a difficult question, but it is still an ongoing discussion, and from a Danish perspective, we haven't closed it yet.
Meanwhile, Mr. Zelensky also says Russia's Vladimir Putin, having no victories to present, is why Russia accuses Kiev of a drone attack on the Kremlin. He said his concern was to defend Ukraine's own cities and villages against the Russian invasion launched almost 15 months ago. Speaking at a news conference in Finland, where Finland, NATO's newest member, was brought in, Mr. Zelensky said Putin has no victories on the battlefield. The second army of the world has lost. They are not capable of occupying Ukraine. We resisted them, and now he needs to find any possibility to motivate them to go advance. Mr. Zelensky also said Russia did not appear to be interested in extending the Black Sea grain deal, but that Kiev was focused on looking for partners to fulfill the deal and was not looking for Russian interest. More reactions now. Kiev residents expect Russian retaliatory strikes after Russia's accusation against Ukraine. Air raid sirens bled throughout Kiev only a few hours after the Kremlin had made its accusations. 18-year-old waitress Yana Tichenko said she didn't believe Ukraine was behind what Russia called an assassination attempt. Kiev has denied any role in the reported incident, with a senior aide to President Zelensky calling it a sign that the Kremlin was planning a major new attack on Ukraine. Another resident, Yaroslav Zaika, an 18-year-old political science student, watched an edited version of the viral video that purportedly showed the drone attack in Moscow. Former United States President Donald Trump says that if he were still president, he'd have ended the Russian-Ukraine war in 24 hours. Mr. Trump made the remarks in a televised interview. The 45th President of the United States said he would use his personal relationships with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to help bring an end to the conflict in a single day.
So if I were president, and I say this, I will end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours. I know Zelensky well. I know Putin well. I would get that ended in a period of 24
You can break that deal.
100%. It would be easy. That deal would be easy. A lot of it has to do with the money. A lot of it has to do with the military, that we're giving. But I would get that deal done within 24 hours. That war has to be stopped. That war is a disaster.
Final thought. Are you going to win next year?
I think we have a very good chance. The economy is not good. I'll make it good. Everyone knows. You know, everyone knows. Even Democrats, they say, well, we agree that Putin would have never gone in. He would have. I told him, you're not going in. Putin would have never gone into Ukraine. President Xi of China would never even be talking about Taiwan. We had that conversation strongly. I stopped North Korea from doing some really bad things, and my relationship with Kim Jong-un is very good. Who knows what's going to happen there? Iran was going to make a great deal. They were going to be happy. I was going to be happy. We're going to have a great relationship. Now they're out of control. They're totally out of control. This world is blowing up around us. It's blowing up around us. You may even lose the dollar as the standard throughout the world. And if you lose the dollar standard, that's like losing a war. In many ways, it's worse than losing a war. Yeah, I think we have a very good chance. I think when people feel it in their pocketbooks. Everyone's saying, you know, Trump's going to turn the economy around. I did it twice, if you think about it, because I did it after COVID. But we had the greatest economy in the history of the world, and I'll be able to do that again quickly and easily.
45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Let's just bring you a quick update on that story about the alleged attack. Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, has called for the physical elimination of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky following the alleged drone attack. Mr. Medvedev himself, a former president of Russia, said after today's terrorist attack, there are no options left aside the physical elimination of Zelensky and his cabal. Let's talk to Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, public policy analyst, joining us from the nation's commercial capital. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Laddie. Thank you so much for having me.
So many things to chew over. I actually hardly know where to begin. But let me start with President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump's, some would say, you know, really outlandish comments, but others would say, look, you never know, he could actually do it. Where do you think this, you know, the views should sway?
Let me start by saying talk is cheap, and it's always easier when you're outside of government or decision making to say all sort of things. The truth is, you cannot take it away from the fact that Trump, because of his character and personality, done certain things in the past that cannot take away from him. He's got the character, he's got the if you have me use the word swag, presence of mind, and maybe attitude towards doing certain things, and that probably might magic wand to get all of this done. So yes, talk is cheap, but his character is his character, his personality is his personality, and without a doubt, that is a very, very significant factor in all of this.
Let me bring you to the main story itself. That's this alleged drone attack on the residence, the official residence of the president of Russia. I mean, the implications are simply mind-boggling. I mean, if it were proved to be true, that's one. If it were proved to be the Ukrainians who did it, it would even be more astounding. If it was a private group, as one of the analysts we reported on had said, you know, someone who's just anti-Russian but did this, you know, outside of official channels, that would make it equally serious. And then, of course, if it were the Russians who managed this because they're about to do something really, really nasty, that would also mean that it's very bad. So whichever way you look at it, whichever way you cut it, this is a major, major, major development.
It's very major, and it's worrisome. Again, for some of us who thought that going forward, start to see a situation where this war will start to grind down, are becoming more worried, because obviously things are happening that is looking like in this for a longer while than we thought it would. It is the Ukrainians have actually tried. If you're expecting them to just stay in this war, just adding their own, and not in one way or the other, you know, launching offensive into Russia, then we're not going to be fair, you know, with them. And if we also expect that the United States or NATO or the rest of the world will support them going into Russia also are not going to be fair, because everyone is obviously afraid that if this is true, it will not be something that we want to manage the outcome. Everyone is afraid of the reaction of Putin, and you just had a former president of Russia. That shows you that Putin has done a great job by not just launching or pursuing this war. He's continued to get the support of his people, and that again is not a very, very good thing. And like you rightly pointed out, if it's something that happened, from an independent group, that is also very dangerous. So what it means is might have situations where they will do things that will negatively impact this war, and at the end of the day, you'll be trading blames. Nobody's going to take charge or take responsibility of what's done. So the longer this war is prosecuted, the more dangerous it becomes, because all sort of things can start to happen from all sort of places, and that is a very, very dangerous development. So yes, like you, it's a worrisome thing, whichever way we look at it. And our prayer is that whatever can be done to quickly address and quickly, just pick all of us out of this, because economically, every-wise, this is a dangerous situation for the world, and it is something that I hope clearly that would come to at least end very soon.
Well, the Ukrainians seem to have formed a habit since this war began. They occasionally do things outside of Ukraine. But because the understanding is that if they use any of the weapons that they get outside of Ukraine, then that is a breach of the agreement with those who are supplying them the weapons, the United States, Germany, Britain, and others. So when these kind of things happen, even if they were the ones who did it, it's a question of denying. But then on the other side, attacking the Kremlin with drones is like attacking the White House with drones. The Kremlin is supposed to be easily one of the most fortified pieces of real estate in the world. So how, a drone or a set of drones got that far in the first place, would give the Russians a cause for worry if they didn't stage this. I mean, if indeed these drones are from either Ukraine or some independent group. That in itself is a huge problem, because that means now Moscow would appear to be vulnerable, right?
The matter is, like before 11/19, nobody ever thought that anybody could get to Pentagon. Yes, you would try as human beings to put things together, protect and fortify, and show that you have strength and do anything you think you can. But the truth of the matter is, no place in the world is completely fully fortified, because at the end of the day, you have human beings working there. I mean, let me just deviate a little. I mean, we've had situations where private discussions, with the Queen at some point, and the videos were all over the place. So as long as you have human beings, tech guys working, you have all sort of people working all over the world, there'll always be that small, hole in the wall. Yes, there are a lot of places that are fortified. Obviously, you rightly defined it. The Kremlin is probably one of the most fortified, structure in the world, or a place in the world. But truth is, as long as human beings are involved, there would always be that loophole, and that is the truth, and we almost accept that.
Let's look at another situation, shall we? President Zelensky is in Finland right now. Finland just joined NATO. It's the 31st member of NATO. Now the prime ministers of Denmark and the other Nordic countries are meeting with him. And they say they're going to support Ukraine's bid to join both the EU and NATO, although there's no timeline attached. I spoke to one of my guests on the program yesterday. I asked, realistically, beyond the pledges and the propaganda and the photo ops, how real is a Ukrainian membership of the EU and NATO right now, given so many other complications that have already crept into the narrative?
Buddy, between you and I, as an African, one of the things I admire the most about those who manage the developed world is their very high sense of management. So they've shown us clearly that whenever they take decisions, they're always very careful in the way they go about it. They look at everything. They look at the cost implication, look at the implications security-wise, they look at all the implications. So yes, they need to say certain things. Yes, they need to take certain steps, but you can be sure, all of us can be sure, that they're very careful of the timing, they're very careful of the sensibility, they're very careful of the implication on everyone, what it will turn out to be. And I tell you that they will take or allow their adoption, into NATO to come to be at the most appropriate time. They are great managers, and I admire them for it. I just pray strongly that we'll start having managers like that managing our affairs in Africa.
Speaking of Africa, one of the things that definitely affects the continent in all of this has been the disruptions in the food supply chains and the grain deal brokered by Turkey and the United Nations between Ukraine and the Russians is due again for renewal on the 18th of May. This time, the Russians are insisting that they're going to walk away because their concerns down the months have not been addressed. When the deal was initially inked, there were provisions for the Russians themselves to export some food and fertilizer and all of that. Largely, that has not happened, not because the Ukrainians are blocking it in any way, but because many of the companies that would otherwise have been involved in the actual movement don't want to get involved. It's too dangerous. It's too costly for them. If they walk away from this, everyone has pointed out that it would be a disaster. But the new thing here is that the Ukrainians themselves don't seem to be too interested in continuing the deal either. They say they are looking for other partners. So is the deal dead?
Not necessarily, but obviously with all the situations surrounding it, it's at a situation where one cannot determine what will happen to it is in the short term, because it is clearly very bad time. I mean, what just happened to Putin, or what is suspected to have happened, the threat on his life will obviously not be a time where you start talking about deals like that. What I would just want to advise Africa is, like EU is doing, they're already building a windmill, for alternative source of power supply. I think we also, as a people, as Africans, also needs to start to look at alternative. Because you see, this war, for me, one of the lessons learned is the fact that as a people, we need to cater for ourselves, because even Ukrainians understand clearly that they can ask for everything. They're not going to get everything from the rest of the world, because they also have their personal problem to deal with. And so, yes, everyone is looking out for themselves. Africa should look out for themselves more than they are doing right now, because there's everyone doing himself at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and one would only hope that those who are in charge of policy formulation and forward thinking are listening to you. Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, public policy analyst, thank you as always for your interest and your contributions on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And coming up after the break, authorities announced 21 casualties in Kherson strike and imposed... Thanks for staying tuned. A warm welcome back to the program. Russian forces have killed at least 21 civilians in attacks on the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, striking a hypermarket and railway station in the regional capital and hitting villages nearby. That's according to the Ukrainians. The prosecutor's office in Ukraine says 3 were killed in an apparent artillery strike as people did their morning shopping in the hypermarket in Kherson. Local officials also said 1 person was killed when the city railway station was bombarded. 3 energy workers were killed while carrying out repairs in a neighboring village, and a man was killed in a residential building in another settlement. Pools of blood and debris lay on the ground outside the hypermarket, whose entrance had been heavily damaged and cordoned off. The Interior Ministry says the victims were all either customers or workers at the hypermarket. And the White House says the United States will announce a new security assistance package for Ukraine to help the Ukrainian military battle Russian forces. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters in Washington that the weapons package, which had been previously reported would be $300 million, will include more ammunition and other supplies.
We will have an announcement today that from the Biden-Harris administration, a new package of security assistance to help Ukraine continue to defend itself on the battlefield and protect its people against Russian aggression. The package, which will be announced later this afternoon by Departments of State and Defense, includes more ammunition for U.S.-provided HIMARS that Ukraine has been using so effectively, as well as additional howitzers, artillery, and mortar rounds, and anti-armor capabilities. This is the 37th package of security assistance for Ukraine using presidential drawdown authorities, and it follows extensive work by the U.S. government over the past few months to fulfill Ukraine's request ahead of its planned counteroffensive and ensure they have the weapons and equipment they need. We will continue to work with our allies and partners around the world to support Ukraine as they defend their democracy.
White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre. Let's talk now to Mr. Ralph Oposoge, public affairs analyst, who joins us via Zoom from the Lekki area of the nation's commercial capital, Lagos. Good morning to you, Mr. Oposoge. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ladi. I'm glad to join again.
Now, let me begin, of course, by asking you about the most recent developments, the one with the perhaps greatest consequences. What do you make of this alleged drone strike on the Kremlin in Moscow and the attempted assassination of President Vladimir Putin?
You know, you and I, we don't have the wherewithal to verify those things. It is good for the U.S. to deny over and over again. But I did watch. I mean, you can see the video you're showing. You can see the drone going towards the flag mast, and it hit the pole of the flag mast. Maybe it was intercepted. I don't know. It's a small drone, but those drones are big enough to carry any bomb. And below that dome is the entrance hall to Putin's office. If you watch most of his videos when he hosts people. In this war, there could be fifth columnists. You know how the Japanese planes went to Pearl Harbor to bombard Pearl Harbor. But nobody has been able to find out the fact that the planes those days cannot leave Japanese shores, or even the Japanese aircraft carrier that was around the Korean Peninsula cannot fly from there successfully and get to Pearl Harbor. Something had to happen for the U.S. Congress to authorize the U.S. to join the World War II. So similarly, the Ukrainian president may be correct that he didn't do it, but can he vouch for his allies? That is where the question is. And you could see the frenzy with which the Ukrainian president was denying that he didn't do it, because he knows what kind of retaliation Russia could do, because so far his offices and command headquarters in Kiev have not been hit. But Russia has the capability to send cruise missiles to that place and also hit his own offices, which is why I think he's denying. But whatever you think of it, it's going to further exacerbate the situation and escalate into very negative dimensions.
Up until now, as you pointed out, the war has been fought along fairly general lines that we hear about war, which is you are going after targets, whether they be civilian or military targets. The personalities have been left out of it largely. We hear rumors from time to time, but the personalities have been left out of it largely. What this incident shows or seems to bring to bear is that this war, as well as being territorial, is now also personal. Because if there was an attempt, alleged at this point, against the Russian president, of course, you expect the Russians to react. And already you heard the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, saying that, look, as far as they are concerned now, the tit for tat is to liquidate Vladimir Zelensky. does this introduce a dangerous new element into the crisis, especially because it's now involving the leaders? A society at war without a leader, or whose leader has been removed suddenly, might have a bit of a problem.
Exactly, Ladi. I think you are correct, because there are some linked happenstances. There is no pretense, okay, that the U.S. has always wanted Putin dead. They have done a lot of things. You can imagine the International Criminal Court placing an arrest warrant on Putin, and people would ask, did the ICC place arrest warrant on the American presidents, various American presidents, when they bombed children out of existence in Libya, or when they invaded Iraq and caused untold hardship on the people? Where was the ICC? So, but let's go back and look at linked incidences. You know that the pro-Russian activist was bombed out in a restaurant about 1 month ago, and then you also know that devices have been put on the rail lines, Russian rail lines, disrupting their supplies. One was carrying petrol and other supplies to certain regions. So who is placing those bombs? That is why you cannot dismiss this drone thing with the wave of the hand. But they all know their capabilities. Putin was trained by the Komitet Gossedarzveznoye Bezopasnosti. That is the former KGB. He is a veritable spy master. And they know that if he wants to reach Zelensky, he will reach Zelensky. This is why the dimension you have just highlighted is worrisome. When they begin to target individuals, it becomes messier and messier, and nobody will be safe, and the falcon will no longer hear the falconer.
You mentioned, of course, the ICC, the International Criminal Court warrant against Vladimir Putin. Of course, he is expected on the African continent later on this year, because BRICS, that's the bloc that includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is going to be hosted by the South Africans. So they've issued an invitation to Putin to come. But we all know what happened with President Omar al-Bashir, as he then was, of Sudan, when he visited South Africa, and there was this same ICC warrant against him. And quite a number of people have pointed out, as you said, that the ICC seems to be biased against particular countries and leaders. But in terms of how possible it is to physically, I mean, the president of Sudan is not the same thing as the president of Russia. So, I mean, if you attempt to execute an arrest warrant against the president of Russia in a foreign country, how viable is that going to be, and what kind of message is that going to send to other countries and even to the ICC itself?
Yeah, you recall, Ladi, that former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, his refusal to actually arrest Omar Bashir was what precipitated a lot of orchestrated crisis in his government. If you recall, his government was stable before that incident. And as soon as he did it, being a former freedom fighter, he was able to dare the West. And from then, all charges against him, corruption, one is not saying he was not corrupt, but they use what you've done against you to get you down. But this is a different ball game. I would expect Putin to dare them. He said that the meeting we hold in South Africa, or I suspect the meeting will be shifted to Moscow. But I know Putin is going to go to South Africa. He's going to go there as the president of a world power. He's going to fly the way the American president flies. His fighter jets will escort his executive aircraft. And I'm sure he'll put battalions, on the ground in South Africa, and I don't see who is going to arrest him. Not the South African government anyway. But this also brings to the fore the quixotic attitude of our African leaders. You can see how Cyril Ramaphosa had to beat a retreat. No one knows who threatened him. If you had said, look, sorry, I'm not going to recognize this, he had the right to say so as the president of a sovereign country, and to say, I think ICC is biased and we are going to pull out. And 2 days after, he said, no, we're not putting that again. I'm sorry, it was a mistake. Up till now, I'm trying to find out, I'm researching to find out who threatened him. But let's see how this plays out, that you and I are spectators in this theater of war. But the only thing is that right from time, the Russians' propaganda machine is inferior to that of the US. And the US is using that propaganda machine and everything to try to bring to the fore some psychological pressure on the Russian president. But we watch and see, Ladi.
I'd like to get your view on former President Donald Trump's assertion, which we reported earlier on in the program, that if he were president, that is, if he was still president or if he became president again, he would end this war in 24 hours. A lot of people would, say that that's a good thing because a lot of people, I'm sure, including you, would want this war ended. But how viable is what he said? That is, he said he has a very good relationship with Vladimir Zelensky. He has an even better relationship with Vladimir Putin. He's quite close to the Chinese president, and so on. So he would end this in 24 hours, leveraging on that, on those personal relationships.
Yeah, I had mentioned on this channel before that the West should have channeled the efforts, all the monies they are pouring into arm Ukraine, which of course is from a commercial consideration. They are not just giving Ukraine arms, because Ukraine is going to pay a lot of reparations after the war, and all the contracts to rebuild Ukraine will go to Western companies. We know how this plays out, but Trump is correct. I can assure you today that if the US says, okay, Zelensky end this war, we're not giving you support again, let us go to the dialogue table, the war will end. And that is what Trump is saying. And you remember when Trump was president, he was going to prosecute Biden's son, Joe Biden Jr., for arms mongering, supplying arms to Ukraine. And this is what it is all about. It's commercial consideration, gains, and of course, the wish for the disintegration of Russia so that America can become the only sole world power. I believe that Trump will do it because he has a way of bullying people to accept. I will assure you, if Trump tells Zelensky to stop the war, he doesn't stop. He may even bomb Zelensky if Zelensky does not accept. Trump is as crazy as that from what we know about him. I believe him.
Indeed. Mr. Ralph Obasogie, public affairs analyst, I want to thank you so much for your time on the program this morning, as always. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Always my pleasure, Ladi. You have a nice day.
You too. And when we return, the ICC warrant against the Russian president is generating debate in South Africa. We'll bring you the details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. After weeks of disputes between countries, European Union members have finalized a scheme to jointly buy ammunition for Ukraine. Sweden, the current holder of the EU's rotating presidency, says the ambassadors approved the decision to support the Ukrainian armed forces with €1 billion for joint procurement of ammunition and missiles. Details of the compromise were not immediately made available. The joint procurement scheme is part of a broader EU drive to get 1 million artillery shells and missiles to Ukraine over the next 12 months, after Kiev said it urgently needs such munitions to fight Russia's invading forces. And in Russia's neighbor, a Belarusian opposition activist was arrested after his Ryanair flight was forced to land in Minsk and has been sentenced to 8 years in prison. Roman Protasevich was hauled off his flight and arrested on charges of inciting unrest. The Minsk Regional Court found him guilty of a series of offenses relating to his work as an editor at an opposition media outlet. The Belarusian state media Belta said he would serve the time in a penal colony. Among the charges Mr. Protasiewicz was tried for were organizing mass riots, calling for sanctions against Belarus, creating or leading an extremist group, and conspiring to seize power. Mr. Protasiewicz had been flying from Greece to Lithuania when Belarusian air traffic control suddenly diverted the flight to Minsk, claiming that there was a bomb threat. He was hurled off the plane and arrested alongside his girlfriend, a Russian citizen, Sofia Sapega. And legislators in the United States Senate have launched their latest attempt to counter China, including a bill that top Democrats say aims to limit the flow of technology to Beijing, deter China from initiating a conflict with Taiwan, and tighten rules to block U.S. capital from going to Chinese firms. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that he will begin crafting the major legislative push, which follows the passage of a bill last year that sought to boost Washington's competition with Beijing in semiconductors and other technology. A Democrat in a speech opening the Senate said the Chinese government is not constraining itself in its pursuit to dominate the 21st century. Mr. Schumer spoke shortly after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced plans to reschedule what was meant to be his first official visit to China. That trip had earlier been postponed after a Chinese high-altitude balloon was detected and subsequently shut down over U.S. territory. American officials have said the balloon was a surveillance device, a claim China had denied. Let's talk now to Ini John Mekwa of our business desk to take a look at that side of things. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
Nice to have you around. The EU is moving. The EU is in the news a lot today.
Yes.
Apart from buying €1 billion worth of euros of ammunition for Ukraine, is moving into war economy mode.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So the EU is moving into, is so much in the news. So apart from all of that, the arms seems to, because I think your last conversation with your guest, I was listening before I came on, it's also about arms. So the EU, you read the story a bit earlier, making arms. So of course they do have that industry, the arms making industry, but it's been left fallow for some years now because of the peace they've been having. So now they do have about 500 million euros that they are keeping as subsidy to encourage arms production, ammunition. That's, well, the target market here is Ukraine. So when they're talking about going to a war economy mode, I mean, like we always say, there's money to be made in war. Unfortunately, it's been as infrastructure and lives are being lost. Right. So it seems the EU is plugging into that now. So instead of depending so much maybe on the US and some of those other countries that President Zelensky has been asking for, they're saying within 12 months, they want to resuscitate their arms production, revive some of the old wares and machineries, and then they will get this working. And of course, encouraging more people, arms producers, to go into that. So, I mean, it just begs the question. I hope we are not getting too comfortable with this situation. War, because
that was actually
if that war economy mode is resuscitated and it's profitable, then you might even have some Europeans, you know, who are looking
who would then be fueling
the war to continue, just as your last speaker talked about Joe Biden's son, you know, who may be, as it has been insinuated in many cases, contributing or gaining, selling weaponry into this, and may be one of the beneficiaries of it.
Indeed, but it's not only the EU or the US and so on who are also priming themselves. A major Iranian automobile maker is also agreed to send vehicles to Russia and Belarus. Remember, we had this conversation earlier. When the West withdrew under the sanctions, Russia was caught on the hop. But they found ways.
Relief has come, So they have an agreement now with Iran. Iran will be supplying them with vehicles. They hope to do that about 45,000 vehicles in 3 years, and that's a lot of money. Obviously, that's a sleeping industry that has gotten more vibe because Iran does have the ability to do that, but they seem not. You know, the West, especially the US, then China, then Japan, when it comes to automobiles. So, I mean, for Iran to have a ready market for vehicles, you know, this is collaboration made good. Another benefit from the
war situation. I guess. As you said, quite a number of people may have more and more interest in keeping this situation as it is.
Unfortunately.
Yes, indeed. Now, the Russian Agriculture Ministry is also planning its own ideas. 3.5 billion rubles to support viticulture and wine making. Now, I want to ask, what is viticulture?
That's wine.
Okay.
It's all about vine, the vineyard,
okay.
You know, getting the fruits, the grapes, and all of that for wine. So we know that no matter the fronts that Russia puts up, the economy is feeling the pinch of the war, the sanctions. So they're looking to other ways, you know, to make money. So they are now looking to boost the winemaking industry there, trying to get the private sector. And, you know, just to add, the social media celebrities and influencers have also been hit because
they have to pay tax.
They have to pay higher taxes, and now more stringent regulation is being used there. So
we must all contribute to the war effort.
Exactly.
That's the way they would interpret it. Thanks, Ini. More of that, of course. Ini and her crew will be on Business Morning and Business Incorporated with the news, not just from Russia and Ukraine, but from across the world. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Finally, on the program, South Africa's Justice Minister Ronald Lamola has criticized the International Criminal Court, ICC, saying it was inconsistent in its work. Mr. Lamola said this while addressing Parliament. Quote, the fact that an investigation into the atrocities in Palestine has not been completed, while the one in Ukraine opened later already has a referral against a non-member state, is an injustice. His stance is the latest from the South African government since March, when the ICC issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, accused of committing war crimes, including against young children, since the invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Russia is not an ICC member state, but Mr. Putin has been invited to attend a summit in South Africa, which is an ICC signatory, in August of this year. That has led to a debate locally and internationally about whether he would be arrested or not. The summit is a convergence of countries in BRICS, a group of emerging economies. As a signatory to the ICC's Rome Statute, South Africa is legally obliged to act on the warrant if Mr. Putin arrives in the country. This has raised questions about its role and the role of the ICC and its relations with African countries. That debate, of course, will continue, but for now, that's our program, our coverage of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. My name is Ladi Akiri Deluale. Thanks for being with us. Good morning.